It was supposed to be a fairy tale for Daniel, a broke 28-year-old desperate for a way out of his crumbling life. He thought he struck gold when Eleanor, an elegant 72-year-old widow with an endless bank account, offered him love, luxury, and loyalty. But on the 7th night after their wedding, he discovered something inside her mansion that shattered everything he thought he knew about her. And it was already too late. Daniel Green had never known stability. Growing up in foster homes, drifting between minimum-wage jobs, and sleeping on friends' couches, he often looked at the lives of the wealthy with a mixture of bitterness and longing. That was until he met Eleanor Whitmore. They met, of all places, at a community art gallery in upstate New York. Daniel had tagged along with a friend who was showcasing a few paintings, not expecting to meet anyone of importance, let alone someone like her. Eleanor, in her 70s, carried herself with a presence that turned heads. She wore a long velvet shawl, her silvery hair pinned in an elegant twist, and her voice, soft but sharp, could cut through a crowded room without effort. She approached him, not the other way around. "You're not like the rest of them," she said, sipping red wine, eyeing him over the rim of her glass. "You look hungry." He smiled awkwardly. "I skipped dinner." She chuckled, but her eyes didn't laugh. Over the next few weeks, they met more and more. At first, Daniel believed she was simply amused by his youth, maybe nostalgic. But slowly, her gestures became grander. She paid off his credit card debt, bought him a watch, invited him to her estate, an old Gothic mansion nestled in the woods outside Hudson Valley. When she proposed marriage, Daniel paused. "You don't have to work another day in your life," she said, resting a veiny hand over his. "No more struggling, no more couch hopping, just you and me, forever." He didn't love her, but she offered the one thing he had never had: security. The wedding was small, private. No family from either side attended. Eleanor said she'd outlived most of her relatives, and Daniel had no one to invite. She wore a dark emerald gown, and he wore a tux she'd had tailored for him. They exchanged vows in the garden behind the mansion. The trees creaked in the wind like murmuring guests. Felt eerie, but Daniel brushed it off as nerves. That first night, she led him to the guest bedroom and said, "I like my space. We'll sleep separately. That's part of the agreement." He agreed without hesitation. That wasn't what he married her for anyway. Over the next week, Daniel wandered the estate. Eleanor often disappeared into her study, a heavy-locked room on the 2nd floor. She told him never to enter it. "Too many old memories," she'd said, and he obeyed at first. It was on the 7th night when it all began to unravel. The wind outside was violent, slamming branches against windows like skeletal fingers. Daniel couldn't sleep. Something had been gnawing at him. The locked door, her late-night murmurs, the muffled crying he thought he'd heard the night before. Maybe it was his guilt, maybe paranoia, but something didn't sit right. At midnight, he crept out of his room. The hallway was dark, but moonlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting distorted colors across the floor. He walked barefoot toward the study. The door loomed ahead of him like a mouth waiting to speak. He tried the knob. Locked. But in the mansion's kitchen drawer, he'd found an old skeleton key earlier that day, tucked beneath silverware. Eleanor had told him it was decorative. It wasn't. He inserted it quietly, heart pounding. The lock clicked. Inside, the study was like stepping into another century. Dust-covered books lined towering shelves. An antique fireplace sat cold and empty. But it was what stood in the center of the room that made him stop breathing. A mannequin. But not just any mannequin, it wore a wedding dress. Old, yellowed lace. A veil covering the face. And beneath the veil, a photograph pinned to the mannequin's chest. Daniel walked closer, stomach twisting. It was a picture of a man, young like him, smiling, dated 1984. Under the photo, in Eleanor's handwriting, were the words, "My first." Daniel staggered back. His fingers trembled. The desk nearby was cluttered with files, photos, and news clippings, all organized into stacks. One stack caught his eye. Missing, James Lawrence, 1984. Disappeared. Harold Bishop, 1992. Vanished after marriage. Stephen Wells, 2003. All men. All young. All married to elderly women. All presumed dead. One final clipping, yellowed and brittle, bore the headline. Whitmore widow inherits fortune again after fourth husband's mysterious disappearance. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. Was Eleanor involved? He heard a floorboard creak behind him. He spun around, but no one was there. Quickly, he gathered a few of the papers, stuffing them into his hoodie. He had to get out, had to leave this house. He bolted from the room, careful to lock the door again, just as it had been. Back in his room, he sat on the edge of the bed, heart racing, trying to process what he'd seen. He stared at the old news clippings until dawn. He didn't sleep. He didn't confront her. Not yet. He needed a plan. He needed to survive. Daniel spent the morning pretending everything was normal. He sat across from Eleanor in the grand dining room, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching as she delicately buttered a croissant. Her expression was calm, unreadable, as always. The sunlight cut across her face through tall, arched windows, illuminating the faint web of wrinkles around her eyes. But Daniel didn't see a frail old woman anymore. He saw a predator in pearls. Eleanor glanced up. "You're quiet today." He forced a smile. "Didn't sleep much." "The wind." She nodded, folding her napkin gently on her lap. "Yes, the house gets restless in storms." Restless. The word lingered in the air like smoke. Daniel's mind raced with questions. Who were the men in the clippings? Were they really her husbands? And most importantly, what happened to them? He didn't dare ask. Not yet. Instead, he played his role. The doting younger husband, the grateful companion. But the longer he stayed, the more the mansion began to feel like a mausoleum. Ornate and quiet, yes, but too quiet. Almost listening. That afternoon, Eleanor said she had errands to run in town. Daniel watched her car disappear down the gravel drive, the iron gates groaning shut behind her. The moment she was out of sight, he darted back upstairs to the study. He had to see more. This time, he wasn't looking for clues. He was looking for evidence, something solid enough to bring to the police. Inside, the air was heavy, like the room hadn't been breathed in for decades. He rifled through more drawers, finding a locked box at the bottom of a cabinet. It was old, brass, with a strange crest etched into it. A serpent eating its own tail. The box didn't open with the skeleton key. Frustrated, he moved to the bookshelf. One of the volumes, the Book of Discreet Burials, wasn't dusty like the others. He pulled it. Click. A section of the wall groaned, revealing a narrow hallway behind it. Daniel hesitated. His skin prickled with unease. But curiosity pushed harder than fear. The passage was narrow, lined with rotting wallpaper and candle sconces long since burned out. He used his phone's flashlight to guide him, the beam flickering as though protesting. The air smelled of mildew and something else. Something coppery. Blood? No. He didn't want to believe that. After several turns, he reached a dead end, almost. A wooden door, nearly invisible against the wall, stood before him. No lock, just a rusted handle. Daniel opened it. Inside was a hidden bedroom, untouched by time. Dust covered everything. But beneath it, the room was feminine. Ornate furniture, a dressing table, and portraits of young men lining the walls. Each portrait had a name scrawled beneath it. James, Harold, Stephen, more. All familiar. All the missing husbands. And in the center of the room, on a small table, sat a jar. Inside the jar floated a ring. A wedding band. A label beneath it read, Daniel. He stumbled back, slamming into the doorframe. She was planning to add him to the collection. His ears rang. His pulse thudded in his skull. He needed to leave now. He turned and bolted back down the narrow passage, retracing his steps through the secret corridor and back into the study. As he stepped into the hallway, heart racing, he froze. Eleanor was standing at the end of the hall, holding a small paper bag from the bakery. Her eyes weren't surprised. They weren't angry. They were knowing. "I forgot my scarf," she said, voice calm. He tried to play it off. "I was just looking for a book." She stepped closer. "The ones in the secret hallway?" Daniel swallowed. "I found the door open." Eleanor smiled. "You're not the first to go exploring. Curiosity, they say, is a young man's poison." He laughed nervously. "I didn't take anything." "No, not yet." She walked past him into the study. He followed her movement with his eyes, ready to run at the first sign of danger. But all she did was walk to the desk and place the bag down. "I brought your favorite," she said. "Cherry Danish." Daniel's stomach churned. She was calm, too calm. It wasn't normal. It wasn't human. "Thank you," he managed, voice tight. That night he didn't sleep. He waited until she retired to her room, then packed a bag quietly. His passport, cash, anything he could grab. But when he crept to the front door, he found it locked. Not with a key, but a steel bar from the inside. Like a fortress. He moved to the back door. Same. Windows, all sealed shut, with thick bolts he hadn't noticed before. He was trapped. Daniel stood in the dark kitchen, breathing hard, trying to steady himself. The floor creaked behind him. He turned, expecting her. But it wasn't Eleanor. It was a man, pale, wide-eyed, barefoot, maybe in his 30s, clutching a candle. His eyes darted around like a cornered animal. "Who are you?" Daniel whispered. The man raised a finger to his lips. "Shoo, she hears everything." Daniel stared in disbelief. "You're alive." The man nodded quickly. "She keeps us here, downstairs, below the house. We don't die. Not right away." Daniel took a step back. "What do you mean, us?" The man looked over his shoulder, toward the basement door. "She preserves us. For later." Before Daniel could ask more, the man vanished into the darkness, disappearing down the narrow staircase leading beneath the house. Daniel didn't follow. He couldn't. He wasn't ready for what waited down there. The flickering light bulb above the basement door cast erratic shadows across the hallway as Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing. A man. Alive. Down there. How many more? And what did he mean by, "She preserves us"? For later? He should have run. Should have broken a window, screamed for help. Done anything but what he did next. He opened the basement door. The air that wafted up was cold and damp, and it smelled of earth and something foul, like decayed wood and rotting fabric. Slowly, Daniel descended, his phone flashlight trembling in his grasp. The staircase creaked beneath his weight, each step groaning like it resented the intrusion. The basement was much larger than expected. The foundation stones were ancient, jagged, and wet with condensation. Pipes ran along the ceiling like exposed veins. And there, along the far wall, were metal doors. 5 of them, each with a tiny, barred window, each resembling a cell. Daniel approached the first door. He peered inside. A figure sat in the far corner, rocking slowly. Male, early 40s perhaps. His face was gaunt, lips cracked. When the man saw Daniel, his eyes widened, not in fear, but in fragile hope. "Help me," he rasped. Daniel recoiled, stomach twisting. He moved to the next cell. Another man, younger, shivering beneath a torn blanket. He too looked up. "She keeps them, like pets, or trophies." His breath caught in his throat as he realized the truth. These weren't just former lovers. They were prisoners. And he was next. He reached the last door, expecting the same. But this cell was different. No movement, no whisper, only bones. A collapsed skeleton curled in the corner. Wedding ring still looped around a bony finger. A name was carved into the wall beside it, etched with fingernails. "Harold." Daniel stumbled backward. He had to get out. He turned and sprinted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind him, bolting it. Then he collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. She wasn't just a manipulative widow. She was a captor, killer, a monster. He didn't sleep that night. At dawn, Daniel tried again to escape, this time aiming for the garage. If he could hotwire one of Eleanor's vintage cars, Maybe he could crash through the gate. But as he entered the garage, he froze. The tires were gone. All of them, from every vehicle. And Eleanor stood at the far end, wearing gardening gloves and clipping a rose from a vine that curled around the stone wall. "You're up early," she said without turning. "I couldn't sleep. You should have some tea. I made valerian root, it calms the nerves." Daniel eyed the pruning shears in her hand. "You know," she said, still facing away, "every man I've ever loved has tried to leave me." She turned now, the shears dangling loosely in her fingers. Her expression was not angry, not even sad, just resigned. "But it's not about love, is it?" she added softly. "It never is with you young men. It's about survival, a better life." "You lied to me," Daniel said. She nodded. "Yes, you killed them." Her gaze didn't waver. "Some, yes, others made it harder. I gave them chances, but they were weak." Daniel's mouth went dry. "I let them live in a way," she said, walking past him, the shears clicking softly with each step. "I fed them, sheltered them. Isn't that what a wife does?" Daniel didn't speak, couldn't. "But you, Daniel," she added with a faint smile, "I liked you most of all." She left the garage then, leaving the scent of cut roses behind. The next few days were unbearable. He kept to his room, rationing granola bars he'd hidden in his suitcase, refusing to eat or drink anything she gave him. At night, he heard the others beneath the floor, sometimes crying, sometimes singing softly to themselves. He wrote letters, folded them into paper planes, and slid them through cracks in the boarded-up windows, hoping desperately that someone might see them. And then, on the fourth day, his chance came. Eleanor hosted a luncheon. 3 guests arrived, 2 women from the Historical Society and a man from the library board. She'd invited them to discuss donations and her legacy. Daniel saw them arrive from his bedroom window and made a plan. He waited until they were deep in the garden. Then he made his move. He sprinted downstairs, grabbing the bundle of clippings and photos he'd hidden from the study. He burst out the back door across the lawn to the garden. The guests turned in surprise. "Please, help me," he shouted, thrusting the bundle into the man's hands. "She's keeping people in the basement, trapped. I've seen them." The man blinked, stunned. The women exchanged looks. Eleanor smiled sweetly, stepping between them. "Oh, he's had another episode," she said gently. "Poor Daniel. He's been struggling with delusions." I didn't want to say anything, but his mind, it's not well. "No, they're real, please. Look at the names. The photos." One of the women opened the folder. Her eyes narrowed. "These are very old," she said slowly. "And the ring," Daniel added. "In the hidden room. My name was on it. She's planning to." "He's been hallucinating," Eleanor said softly, laying a gentle hand on his arm. "Ever since the accident." Daniel jerked away. "There was no accident." The guests were clearly uncomfortable. The man cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should call someone? A doctor?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "I think that would be best." They left not long after. Daniel watched from the steps, helpless, as they drove away. None of them believed him, but he saw one thing that gave him a sliver of hope. The man kept the folder. That night, Eleanor brought him dinner. He didn't touch it. She sat across from him in the dim dining room, candlelight dancing in her eyes. "You tried to expose me," she said. "You're sick." She chuckled. "Perhaps." Silence. "You know," she added, tilting her head, "when I was young, men ignored me. They used me, threw me away." She reached into her blouse and pulled out a small, red velvet box. Inside was a key. "To the cellar," she said, placing it on the table. "You want the truth? Go deeper." Daniel stared at the key. "You've seen the symptoms," she said, "but not the cause." She stood and walked away, humming something under her breath. A lullaby. Daniel didn't sleep. He sat at the table all night, staring at the key. By morning, he made a decision. He would go deeper. He had to know what Eleanor was hiding beneath the floorboards and why. The key was heavier than it looked. Daniel gripped it tightly as he descended into the basement, the cold metal biting into his palm with each slow step. He moved quietly, not wanting to wake whatever lived down there. Not just the trapped men, but the truth Eleanor had been hiding from everyone, maybe even herself. The basement air was denser than before, thick with the stink of mold and damp stone. The dim glow of his flashlight danced across the rough walls, throwing long shadows that twitched as if alive. He reached the row of metal cell doors again. Each man inside looked up at him, hopeful, desperate. "I'm going further," Daniel whispered. "I'm going to end this. I promise." Their eyes followed him as he approached the far end of the basement, the place Eleanor had never let him see. Behind a stack of old trunks and broken furniture was a thick iron door, recessed into the wall like the mouth of a tomb. No handle, just a large keyhole. He took a breath, slid the key into the lock, and turned. The door groaned open. Beyond it was a spiral staircase descending into pitch black. Stone steps, no handrail. This wasn't just a basement. This was something much older. Older than the house. He descended slowly, the stone cold against his bare feet. The air became wet and strangely warm, filled with a sulfurous smell that made his stomach turn. Every instinct told him to turn back, but he didn't. At the bottom was another chamber. This one was unnatural. The walls were smooth, carved from bedrock, marked with symbols Daniel didn't recognize. Symbols like the one on the brass box in the study, the serpent eating its own tail. Candles flickered on every surface, freshly lit. Someone had been here recently, and in the center of the chamber stood an altar. Not a church altar. This one was made of black stone, covered in deep red stains. Chains hung from its sides. Bones were scattered around its base. And behind it, on the far wall, was a mural ancient and horrifying. It depicted a woman in a wedding dress, standing over a kneeling man with a knife in her hand. Behind her were rows of shadowed faces, men, all with blank eyes, mouths sewn shut. And in the corner, barely visible, was the Ouroboros, the serpent. Eternal consumption. Eternal repetition. Daniel turned to leave and saw Eleanor standing in the doorway. Her face was blank, her skin waxen in the candlelight. "I told you," she said. "You wanted the truth." "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "What the hell is this place?" "This is where I was born," she whispered. "Not in flesh, in purpose." Daniel backed away. "I was just a girl when I first came here," she continued. "My mother brought me, and her mother brought her. All of them bound to the same vow, the same hunger." Daniel's breath caught. "What hunger?" She stepped closer. "Not for food, not for power, for time." His skin prickled. "I was meant to fade like everyone else," she said. "But I learned the secret. The men, they give it to me. Their love, their blood, it feeds the altar. It feeds me." She looked no different. But now he saw it. The way her eyes shimmered too brightly. The way her skin barely wrinkled. A 72-year-old woman who moved like someone half her age. Stronger than she should be. Colder than she should be. "Every husband, every lover," she said, voice trembling with some kind of ecstasy. "They gave me years." She looked down at her hands. "And you were supposed to be my last." Daniel bolted. He sprinted up the spiral staircase, her footsteps thundering behind him. He burst into the basement, nearly tripping on the stone threshold, and slammed the iron door shut. He grabbed a rusted pipe and wedged it through the lock, just as her fingers curled around the door's edge. A hiss of fury echoed from the stairwell below. Daniel ran to the cells. "The key!" he shouted. "I found the key!" The men scrambled forward as he unlocked each cell one by one. They emerged like ghosts, blinking in disbelief. "We have to go now." They didn't ask questions. They followed. They reached the main floor and swarmed the dining room, looking for weapons, tools, anything they could use. One of them, the man Daniel first saw in the hall, grabbed a fireplace poker. "She's not human," he whispered. "I know." They made their way to the front door. The steel bar was heavy, but with their combined strength they tore it off. Daniel flung the door open, and there she stood. Eleanor. Not just Eleanor. Something beneath her skin had begun to show. Her eyes were pitch black. Her lips curled, revealing two sharp teeth. Her body shimmered like it was flickering between two realities. One old and decaying, the other smooth and young. "You ungrateful boys," she hissed. "You want to leave?" She took a step forward. The others froze. Daniel stepped in front of them. "I'm ending this," he said. He held up the brass box he'd taken from the study earlier that morning, after finding the key hidden behind a loose stone in the cellar. It was now open. Inside was a dagger. Not steel. Not silver. Obsidian. Etched with the serpent symbol. She froze. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. Daniel didn't answer. He lunged. The blade sunk into her shoulder. Not enough to kill, but enough to make her scream. Her body convulsed. She staggered backward, the illusion of youth flickering wildly. "Run!" Daniel shouted. They did. They bolted into the woods, feet pounding against the earth, breath ragged, fear driving them forward like fire. Behind them, the house screamed. Not Eleanor. The house itself. Like it was angry. Like it was alive. And Daniel knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The night swallowed them whole. Daniel and the others ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out, collapsing in the dew-drenched underbrush miles from the estate. Behind them, the distant mansion loomed like a bad dream, its silhouette swallowed by the trees and the unnatural silence that now pressed around them. They didn't speak, couldn't. Each man was a survivor now, marked by the horrors of what they'd seen and narrowly escaped. But Daniel's mind didn't rest. Not even when they stumbled upon an old logging road where, by some stroke of grace, a passing trucker stopped and took them to safety. In the weeks that followed, Daniel told his story. To police, to journalists, to anyone who would listen. But the mansion? By the time they returned with authorities, it was empty. No Eleanor. No cells. No bones. No altar. Just a beautifully preserved estate with clean rooms and nothing to suggest what had happened beneath its floors. The brass box and obsidian dagger were gone. So were the other men's belongings. Everything meticulously wiped clean. All except for one thing. A name carved into the basement wall, where the hidden door used to be. Daniel. Fresh. Scratched into stone with a fingernail. They closed the investigation in under a week. Authorities blamed it on group hysteria. Trauma-induced delusion. Daniel was offered therapy, medication, even public sympathy for a while, until attention moved on to the next headline. But Eleanor? She had vanished. And Daniel knew she wasn't dead. 1 year later, Daniel didn't go back to school. He moved across the country, took a job doing renovations in a small town near the Canadian border. Quiet, off the grid. He kept a gun in every room of his small cabin. And he never went on a date again. Not once. But he couldn't let it go. Late at night, he'd pore over old records, genealogy archives, whispered legends. And slowly a pattern emerged. Every 30 years, in a different part of the country, a woman appeared, sometimes calling herself Eleanor, other times Eleonora, Eleanor, or Ellen. Always widowed. Always wealthy. Always childless. And every time, young men disappeared. A handyman. A gardener. A struggling artist. A grad student. None of them ever found again. He followed the trail back nearly 2 centuries. The woman never aged. Just changed names. The Ouroboros. The cycle. Every 30 years. A new beginning. And now, it was starting again. 3 months later, New Orleans came in the form of a headline. One Daniel would have ignored, except for the photo. Mysterious heiress donates mansion to Historic Preservation Fund. She looked 45, maybe 50, impossibly elegant, with soft silver blonde hair, pearl earrings, and a smile Daniel knew all too well. Eleanor, now calling herself Ms. Lenora Whitmore. The house was being turned into a boutique hotel. Daniel stared at the article, hands trembling. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was starting over. And something inside him snapped. He packed a bag, took the dagger he'd hidden beneath his floorboards, and bought a one-way ticket to Louisiana. New Orleans, 2 weeks later. The mansion was open for tours. Daniel bought a ticket like everyone else, pretended to be a curious tourist. The guides gushed about the timeless charm of the property, how Ms. Whitmore had graciously preserved the original structure, including its stone basement, once used as a wine cellar during Prohibition. Daniel saw through it all. She was building the next nest, preparing for the next cycle. The guide asked for questions. Daniel raised his hand. "Will Ms. Whitmore be attending today?" "Oh," the woman said with a smile. "She's hosting a small private event this evening, but she sometimes appears during our afternoon tours." Daniel smiled back. "Then I'll come again tomorrow." That night, he broke in after midnight. The security system was minimal. Cameras disabled. Guards gone. It was like she wanted him to come. He moved silently through the halls, flashlight gripped tight in one hand, dagger in the other, down into the basement, past racks of antique wine bottles, past a false wall. He found the altar again, the same obsidian slab, fresh candles flickering, and bones, new ones, small, animal maybe, and standing in front of the mural, painting a new face into the wall, was Eleanor. She didn't turn. "I wondered how long it would take," she said softly. "I came to end it." She did turn now. Her face glowed in the candlelight. "Ageless. Impossible. You can't end what doesn't die," she said. "You of all people should understand that by now." He stepped closer. "Why me?" She smiled. "Because you were brave, curious, and I loved you in my own way. You killed them. I saved them from their own weaknesses. But you left. And now you've come back." He raised the dagger. "Then finish it," she said, baring her chest. Daniel hesitated. Was this a trick? A trap? "Do it," she said. "Or leave, and I'll keep feeding. In another place, another name. You'll always wonder. Always look over your shoulder." He lunged. The dagger pierced her heart. She gasped, not in pain but in relief. Her body began to shimmer, crack, and crumble, like porcelain breaking from within. Light poured from the wound, blinding and golden. She fell backward onto the altar, her face softening as she whispered, "Thank you." Then she was gone. Only the dagger remained, glowing faintly in the dim light. And on the wall behind her, the mural began to fade. The faces, the serpent, all of it, as if the cycle had ended. Epilogue, 1 year later. Daniel sits on a quiet porch somewhere in Oregon, surrounded by pine trees and silence. No nightmares, no whispers from beneath the floor. He sleeps soundly now. But on the table beside him lies a small red velvet box. Inside it, the dagger. And once a year, on the anniversary of Eleanor's death, it glows faintly, like an ember that refuses to die completely, because some cycles never end. They just sleep, until someone